My name is Anna Hudson, 29 years old, a sergeant in the United States Army. And this was my first time meeting the family of my fiancé, Evan, at their Connecticut estate. I hadn't been inside for more than 5 minutes. His mother, Linda, stared down at the combat boots I'd been forced to wear because of a flash downpour. And she said with a smile as cold as a morgue slab, "Evan, darling, I don't believe you told us you were dating the security staff. Did you check your weapon at the door, dear?" The giggle from his sister, Chloe, was worse. Evan just stood there, his face pale. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know the legacy I truly carried. If you've ever been treated like dirt by your partner's family, if you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and listen to what happened when they tried to write me out of the family will. The drive up to the Whitmore estate in Greenwich felt like ascending into another atmosphere. The public road, flanked by ancient stone walls, gave way to a private, winding driveway paved with crushed white gravel that crunched under the tires of Evan's Lexus. The house wasn't a house, it was a statement. A sprawling stone manor that looked like it had been plucked from the English countryside and dropped into a manicured forest. It was beautiful, imposing, and utterly silent. Evan killed the engine, and the silence pressed in. He turned to me, a sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a little too high. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. I'm always ready. I wasn't lying. I'd faced down threats far more tangible than a disapproving mother-in-law, but my heart was hammering a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I'd spent 2 hours that morning pressing my Army service uniform, making sure the creases were knife-sharp and the brass on my belt buckle gleamed. It was my finest attire, a uniform that represented honor, sacrifice, and commitment. It was the best I had to offer. I hoped it would be enough. Evan rushed to open my door, his movements jerky and anxious. We walked to the massive oak doors, and before he could ring the bell, one swung open. A butler, straight out of central casting, nodded stiffly. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you in the drawing room." The foyer was a cavern of marble and silence. Our footsteps echoed as we followed the butler. In the drawing room, seated on cream-colored sofas that probably cost more than my car, were Tom and Linda Whitmore. They looked like they'd been sculpted from ice. Tom, in a tailored Armani suit, was reading the Wall Street Journal. Linda, draped in a silk Prada dress, was examining her flawless nails. Neither of them stood up. Evan's voice trembled slightly. "Mom, Dad, this is Anna." Tom lowered his paper just enough to peer over the top, his eyes giving me a swift, dismissive appraisal. Linda, however, performed a full inspection. Her gaze started at my perfectly pinned hair, slid over the medals on my chest, and landed with theatrical disdain on my combat boots. She let the silence stretch for a beat too long before a thin smile touched her lips. A smile that didn't come close to reaching her cold, blue eyes. "We were expecting a different look, Evan dear," she said, her voice a soft, melodic poison. "That uniform. It's certainly an interesting choice for a dinner party." The word interesting hung in the air, weighted with everything she wasn't saying. Common, inappropriate, absurd. She made me feel like a circus performer who'd wandered into the wrong tent. The dinner was torture conducted with sterling silver. We were seated at a dining table that could have landed a small plane, so long and wide that Evan's parents were distant figures at the other end. The clinking of cutlery was the only sound for long stretches. Finally, Linda decided to resume her interrogation. "So, Anna," she began, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Evan tells us your family is from Ohio. How quaint." She said the word as if describing a charming but slightly dirty farm animal. I kept my back straight, my military training a shield against the onslaught. "Yes, ma'am, a town just outside Akron." "Akron," she repeated, tasting the word. "And your father? He's a plumber, is that right?" "Yes, he is," I said, a spark of pride in my voice. My dad was a good man who worked hard with his hands. "Oh," Linda breathed, her eyes wide with feigned admiration. "That's admirable, truly." We always need people like that. The way she said people like that made it sound like a separate species. It was a verbal pat on the head, a gesture of charity from a queen to a peasant. In that moment, I felt myself shrink. All the confidence I had earned, all the strength I'd built, it all seemed to evaporate under her condescending gaze. I was a bug under a microscope, pinned and dissected. That's when Chloe, Evan's younger sister, decided to join the attack. She'd been smirking into her wine glass all evening, looking like a pampered cat toying with a mouse. She let out a little giggle. "Sergeant Anna," she chirped, the title dripping with mockery. "Being in the army, I bet you're not used to fancy food like this, are you?" She gestured with her fork to the tiny portion of seared scallop on my plate. "I hope you know which fork to use. There are so many." She giggled again. I didn't respond, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a cruel curiosity. "Oh, and one more thing. I'm just curious. Did you have to, you know, kill anyone?" The air in the room turned to solid ice. The question was so brutal, so utterly devoid of respect or humanity, that it sucked all the oxygen out. The soft clinking of silverware stopped. Evan's face went from pale to ghostly white. My eyes shot to him, a desperate, silent plea. "Say something. Defend me. Do something." He cleared his throat, a pathetic, strangled sound. He couldn't meet my gaze. "Chloe, don't be rude," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on his plate. He then looked up at his parents. "Mom, Dad, Anna's a hero." His father, Tom, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words were as sharp and cold as a razor blade. He cut Evan off without even looking at me. "Heroes don't pay the mortgage, son," he said, his voice flat and bored, as if discussing a stock that had failed to perform. "They just make a mess and die young." My head snapped back to Evan. I was looking for a fighter, a partner, an ally. But the man I saw wasn't any of those things. His face was a blank mask of terror and capitulation. His eyes were empty, reflecting nothing back at me but my own crushing disappointment. That empty look told me everything I needed to know. It told me I was alone on enemy territory with no backup in sight. And it sent me spiraling back to a place I'd spent my entire life trying to escape. As I sat there at that polished mahogany table in Connecticut, surrounded by the suffocating scent of old money and contempt, I wasn't just Sergeant Anna Hudson anymore. I was a scared little girl again, back in our cramped house in the heart of the Ohio Rust Belt, a place where dreams went to rust right alongside the steel mills. The disdain in Linda Whitmore's eyes wasn't new to me. It was just a wealthier, more articulate version of the dismissal I'd known my entire life. My father was a steelworker, a man forged from the same iron and grit as the mills he worked in. When the mills started closing, something inside him closed down too. His world shrank to the dimensions of his worn-out recliner, the flickering glow of the TV, and the endless supply of cheap beer in the fridge. That chair was his throne, and from it he ruled our small, dusty kingdom with a voice roughened by smoke and disappointment. His most common decree was a roar that would shake the thin walls. "Anna, get your dad a beer." It was never a request. It was a summons. I was the youngest and the only girl. My two older brothers, Mike and Dave, were pillars in his eyes. They were the future, the ones who would carry on the Hudson name, even if they mostly just carried six-packs to their buddies' houses. I was something else entirely. "They're the breadwinners," he'd slur, gesturing at them with his beer can. "You're a mouth to feed, a burden. You should be in the kitchen with your mother, learning how to cook a decent meal for a husband." He wasn't just saying I was different, he was saying I was less. A liability on his life's balance sheet. I tried so hard to prove him wrong, to show him I had value beyond the kitchen. I studied until my eyes burned, burying myself in books because in their pages I could be someone else, someone important. In my senior year of high school, I won the district's Academic Excellence Award. It was the only major academic trophy our school brought home that year. I remember walking into the living room, the heavy plaque cold in my hands, my heart pounding with a fragile, desperate hope. This was it. This was the proof. I held it out to him. He was in his throne, of course, watching a football game. The air smelled of stale beer and fried onions. He glanced at it. A flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and then he looked back at the TV. "That's nice," he grunted. "Now go set the table. Your brothers will be home soon." That was it. That's all my achievement was worth. A passing grunt. An instruction to go back to my designated place. The plaque suddenly felt foolish and cheap in my hands. A few weeks later, my brother Dave, drunk and reckless, crashed my dad's Ford pickup truck into a telephone pole. The whole front end was accordioned. I braced for the explosion, the kind of rage I'd have gotten if I'd so much as scratched the paint. But it never came. My dad just sighed, a long, weary sound, and the next weekend, he co-signed a loan for Dave to get a newer, better truck. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a hot, sharp stone that lodged itself in my chest and never went away. It taught me a brutal lesson. What I accomplished would never matter as much as what my brothers simply were. They were sons. I was just a daughter. But the deepest cut didn't come from my father's angry words. It came from my mother's silence. She was a ghost in our house, always moving, always cleaning, always trying to remain invisible. When my father's dismissals became too cruel, I would run to her, my eyes burning with tears of frustration. I wanted her to be my champion, my defender. She would just pull me into the kitchen, her hands smelling of dish soap and bleach, and whisper, "That's just how men are, honey. You just have to learn to live with it. Don't make him angry." She never stood up for me, not once. She chose peace over her own daughter. Her silence wasn't peacekeeping, it was a betrayal. It confirmed my father's verdict. I wasn't worth fighting for. That silence is what carved out the hollow space inside me, the one I've been trying to fill ever since. It created the wound, the raw nerve that the Whitmores had so expertly found and pressed on. So when I met Evan in college, it felt like I could finally breathe. I'd gotten out of Ohio on a full ROTC scholarship. I was surrounded by people who saw my discipline not as a flaw, but as a strength. And then there was Evan. He was from a world I couldn't even imagine, but he looked at me like I was a miracle. One night, studying in the library, he just stopped and said, "You're incredible. You know that? The way you focus, the way you carry yourself. It's just incredible." No one had ever said that to me before. He saw value in the very things my father had scorned. He was the first person who ever made me feel like I was not just enough, but more than enough. I clung to that feeling, to him, like a drowning woman clings to a life raft. I realize now that I didn't just fall in love with Evan. I fell in love with the reflection of myself I saw in his eyes. And that's what made his cowardice at that dinner table so devastating. When he let his family tear me apart, when he offered that weak, pathetic defense and then fell silent, he wasn't just being a timid son. He was taking away the one thing he had given me, validation. He was stealing back the life raft and leaving me to drown in the same cold, lonely water I'd spent my whole life swimming in. Why was I there? Why was I trying to impress these awful, soulless people? The answer echoed back from that dusty living room in Ohio, because I'd spent my entire life doing it, starting in my own home. If you've ever felt like you were invisible in your own family, if you ever had an achievement dismissed while a sibling was praised for doing nothing, please do me a favor. Just type, "I see you" in the comments below, so I know I'm not alone. And hit that like button to show your support. Because knowing others have walked this path, it makes the road ahead a little less lonely. After that disastrous dinner, a Cold War began. It wasn't declared with shouts and slammed doors, but with a series of quiet, calculated maneuvers designed to isolate and undermine me. The Whitmores didn't fight with fists. They fought with money, influence, and Evan's own weakness as their primary weapons. The first volley came from Linda. A week later, a heavy cream-colored box with the logo of a Fifth Avenue boutique arrived at my small off-base apartment near Fort Bragg. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a silk cocktail dress. It was beautiful, elegant, and astronomically expensive. It was also a slap in the face. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on thick cardstock, the ink flowing in perfect, cursive loops. "Dearest Anna," it read, "I thought you might need something a little more appropriate for our events. Do put that uniform away, won't you?" It wasn't a gift. It was an order wrapped in silk. A command to erase my identity and conform our events. The words were a warning. To be a part of their world, I had to stop being myself. I folded the note, placed it back in the box, and shoved it into the back of my closet, a silent declaration of defiance. But I could feel the walls starting to close in. The second, more insidious attack came through Evan. He started calling less. Our nightly video chats, once the bedrock of our long-distance relationship, became shorter, then sporadic. He always had an excuse. "Sorry, babe, got an early meeting with Dad." "Hey, can I call you back? We're at the club." "Just swamped. This new project is killing me." The loving, attentive man I knew was being replaced by a stressed-out, distant stranger. The "I love yous" at the end of our call started to sound rehearsed, automatic. I felt a familiar, cold dread creeping up my spine. He was pulling away. I knew it, and I knew who was pulling the strings. One night, after he'd canceled a call for the third time in a row, I'd had enough. I called him back, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and fear. "What's going on, Evan?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "You're a ghost. Are you avoiding me?" He sighed, a long, weary sound that grated on my nerves. "Anna, you wouldn't understand. It's my family. They're intense." "Intense? Or hostile?" I shot back. "They just want what's best for me," he said defensively, his voice rising. "They're offering me a VP position at the firm, a full partnership. This is my future, Anna. But they think you're too rigid, too military. They don't think you fit into my world." He paused and then delivered the killing blow. "Couldn't you just try to change a little? For me? For us?" Change. He wanted me to change. The word hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. He wasn't asking me to compromise. He was asking me to surrender, to become the woman in the silk dress his mother had chosen. My silence was answer enough. The call ended with a strained, awkward goodbye. I didn't sleep that night. If Linda's weapon was manipulation and Evan's was emotional withdrawal, Tom Whitmore's was a sledgehammer. He called me the next afternoon. There was no greeting, no preamble, just his cold baritone voice on the line. "Sergeant." The way he said my rank made it sound like an insult. "Let's be direct. You're a smart girl. You understand assets and liabilities. Right now, you're a liability to my son's future. So, what's your price? $100,000, $200, name a number to walk away and let him get on with his life. He has a future, Sergeant, and it doesn't involve some grunt from Ohio with a chip on her shoulder." I was so stunned I couldn't speak. He was trying to buy me off like I was a bad investment he wanted to unload. The sheer arrogance of it took my breath away. "My honor isn't for sale, Mr. Whitmore," I finally managed to say, my voice tight with fury. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Honor doesn't come with a trust fund, dear. Think about it." He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, shaking with a rage so profound it made me feel sick. They were a machine, this family, working in perfect, toxic harmony to dismantle my relationship and my spirit. They offered Evan a gilded cage, a promotion, exclusive dinners at their members-only country clubs, a life of effortless luxury, and the price of admission was me. I was losing him. I could feel him slipping through my fingers, pulled by the irresistible gravity of wealth and privilege. The final, decisive blow came from Chloe. It was a Saturday. I was on base at Fort Bragg, trying to lose myself in the familiar routine of duty, trying to pretend my world wasn't falling apart. During a short break, I idly scrolled through Instagram. And then I saw it. It was a picture on Chloe's feed. A sun-drenched, professionally shot photo taken on the deck of a massive yacht. The Whitmore family was all there, smiling their perfect, predatory smiles. Tom, Linda, Chloe, and Evan. Standing next to Evan, with her hand possessively on his arm, was a beautiful, generic-looking blonde in a white bikini. The daughter of one of Tom's business partners, I presumed. She fit in perfectly. And the caption, written in a bubbly, cheerful font, was a dagger to my heart. It read, "Family is forever." My blood ran cold. He was there. With them. With her. While I was here, waiting for a call he never intended to make. My hands were shaking, but my movements were precise. I tapped his name and hit the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went straight to voicemail. "Hey, you've reached Evan. Can't take your call right now. Leave a message." Of course he couldn't take my call. He was busy. Busy smiling for a picture. Busy replacing me. Busy being the son his parents always wanted. He was on that boat, living the life they had chosen for him, and I was not a part of it. The calls were getting shorter. The "I love yous" were replaced by "I'm busy." He was distancing himself from me, building a wall brick by brick, and I knew exactly who was handing him the mortar. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were a slow-motion collapse. Evan and I were technically still together, but our relationship was on life support. The calls were infrequent, the texts were hollow. But a small, foolish part of me still held on to hope. He had promised months ago that he would fly down to North Carolina to spend Thanksgiving with me. It was our tradition. It was supposed to be our island of normalcy in a sea of chaos. Thanksgiving morning arrived, cold and gray. I'd spent the previous day cleaning my tiny apartment, buying groceries, even getting a pumpkin pie from the store, imagining his smile when he walked through the door. I waited and waited. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call, it was a text. 5 brutal, cowardly words that ended everything. "Family needs me here. Sorry." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Sorry. That's all I got. I was a commitment he could cancel with a text message. A wave of loneliness so profound, so absolute, washed over me that it felt like I was physically drowning. I had no family to go to in Ohio. That bridge had been burned long ago. And the family I was supposed to be joining had just made it crystal clear that I was not and would never be one of them. I was utterly, completely alone. I couldn't stay in that apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of plans that would never happen. I put on my uniform, it was my armor, my second skin, and drove to the base. The dining facility was one of the few places open, serving a holiday meal for the soldiers stuck on duty or with nowhere else to go. The room was mostly empty, echoing with a quiet sadness. I got my tray, a scoop of dry turkey, some watery mashed potatoes, and a dollop of cranberry sauce from a can, and found a table in the farthest corner. I was sitting there, staring at the congealing gravy on my plate, trying desperately not to cry, when a warm, heavy hand landed gently on my shoulder. I looked up into the kindest eyes I had ever seen. They belonged to Father Michael, the base chaplain. He was a man in his 60s, with a face full of gentle wrinkles and a salt and pepper beard. He'd seen more war and more pain than any 10 soldiers combined, and it showed in the deep compassion of his gaze. "Sergeant," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "The good Lord doesn't intend for anyone to be alone on Thanksgiving." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask why I was there. He just pulled out the chair across from me, sat down with his own tray of food, and started eating, as if joining me was the most natural thing in the world. We sat in silence for a few minutes. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was a peaceful one. But his simple act of kindness did what all the Whitmore's cruelty could not. It broke through my defenses. A single hot tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. Then another. Soon I was covering my face with my hands, my shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Father Michael didn't say a word. He just waited. When the storm finally subsided, I wiped my eyes, feeling raw and exposed. "I'm sorry, Father," I whispered, ashamed of my breakdown. "Never apologize for a wound that's bleeding," he said softly. And then it all came pouring out. The dinner in Connecticut, the silk dress, Tom's financial threat, the Instagram photo, all of it. I told him everything, the words tumbling out in a messy, heartbroken torrent. When I was finished, I looked at him, my voice cracking. "Why do they hate me so much, Father? What did I do wrong?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "Anna," he said, and the way he used my first name felt like a blessing. "They don't hate you. They're terrified of you." I blinked, confused. "Terrified? Of me?" "Yes," he said, nodding. "You are strong, disciplined, and honorable. You have built a life for yourself out of nothing. You are everything they are not. You are a mirror, and when they look at you, they see their own weakness, their own emptiness, their own lack of character reflected back at them. It's easier for them to try and shatter the mirror than to face the reflection." His words settled over me, a balm on a burn. He didn't offer pity, he offered perspective. He didn't see me as a victim, he saw me as a warrior. He stood up. "Come on, Sergeant, you're not eating this sad excuse for a meal, you're coming home with me." I didn't have the strength to argue. I followed him to his car, and he drove me to a small, cluttered house just off base. The moment I walked in, I was hit by a wave of warmth and noise. The smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon filled the air. A football game, the Detroit Lions versus the Green Bay Packers, a Thanksgiving classic, was blaring from the TV. The living room was a chaotic, wonderful mess of soldiers. Young privates, seasoned NCOs, a few officers, all laughing, shouting at the screen, and drinking beer. They were the holiday orphans, the soldiers Father Michael had collected who had nowhere else to be. A big, burly master sergeant looked up as I walked in. He saw my uniform and my rank. He didn't see a plumber's daughter. He saw a fellow soldier. He broke into a huge grin. "Chaplain, you brought a staff sergeant. Grab a plate, Sarge. There's plenty to go around." No one asked me about my family. No one judged what I was wearing. They saw my uniform, and they saw a sister. They made room for me on the crowded couch. They handed me a plate piled high with real turkey, stuffing, green bean casserole, and sweet potato pie. They argued about football plays and shared stories from back home. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I belonged. The stark contrast between this loud, messy, loving chaos and the cold, sterile silence of the Whitmore dining room was so intense it was painful. This was family. Not the one you're born into, but the one you find. The one that chooses you, stands by you, and sees you for who you truly are. Sitting there, surrounded by my brothers and sisters in arms, I felt a tiny, fragile piece of my shattered heart begin to heal. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving, Evan showed up at my door. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked like he'd lost 10 pounds. He stood on my doorstep, rain plastering his expensive hair to his forehead, and he begged. He swore he loved me. He swore he'd fought with his parents, that he'd told them he couldn't live without me. He cried. He promised things would be different. He said we would get married, no matter what they said. My heart, which had been so carefully piecing itself back together, softened. I saw the desperate man I loved, not the coward who had abandoned me. I let him in. I forgave him. It was the single biggest mistake of my life. His return wasn't a surrender on his family's part, it was a strategic retreat. They hadn't given up the war, they'd simply changed tactics. They would allow the wedding, but on their terms. Every single one of them. The illusion of my involvement was just that, an illusion. I wasn't the bride, I was a prop in the Whitmore production of The Perfect Wedding. The first sign was the meeting. Tom summoned Evan and me to his lawyer's office in a glass tower in Manhattan. The room was sterile and silent, smelling of leather and money. Tom sat opposite us, flanked by his attorney, a man with the warm demeanor of a shark. "Just a formality, Sergeant," Tom said, sliding a thick, leather-bound document across the polished table. "A prenuptial agreement, standard procedure for a family like ours." It was 50 pages long, 50 pages of dense, legal jargon designed to strip me of everything. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that in the event of a divorce, I would walk away with nothing. Not a single cent of the Whitmore fortune. I expected that. What I didn't expect was the clause on page 37. It was titled Parental Rights. It stipulated that if we ever had children, I would have to agree to forfeit primary custody if Evan could prove that my military career had a negative impact on the family. Negative impact. The term was deliberately vague, a legal landmine waiting to be triggered. They weren't just protecting their money. They were preemptively trying to take my future children from me. My own military service, the source of my pride and identity, was being framed as a threat. I felt the air leave my lungs. Next came the battle of the dress. The wedding was to be held at the Greenwich Glen Golf Club, a place so exclusive you probably needed a background check to even look at the website. I had one request. Just one. I wanted to wear my Army white mess uniform for the reception. It's the formal evening equivalent of the ASU, a beautiful traditional uniform that represents a sacred commitment. It was a part of me, a symbol of my service and honor. I made the mistake of mentioning this to Linda over the phone. The silence on the other end was so cold it could have caused frostbite. Absolutely not, she finally hissed, her voice dripping with horror. You will not stand next to my son looking like a palace guard. It's undignified. I have already selected a Vera Wang gown for you. It's been paid for. Do not embarrass this family, Anna. She hung up. No discussion, no compromise. A decision had been made for me. A check had been written. I was to be a doll dressed to her specifications. The Vera Wang dress was just another uniform she was forcing on me, one designed to erase my own. I ran to Evan, my last line of defense, my supposed partner. I found him in the hotel room they'd booked for our pre-wedding planning trip, staring blankly at his laptop. I explained what his mother had said, my voice shaking with a fury I could barely contain. I needed him to fight for me, just this once. He didn't even look up from his screen. He just rubbed his temples, his face a mask of weary irritation. Can you just give in on this one, Anna? He sighed. It's just a dress, for God's sake. Why do you have to turn everything into a battle? Why can't you just be normal for once? Normal. The word hit me like a physical slap. Normal meant spineless. Normal meant compliant. Normal meant erasing every part of myself that they found inconvenient. He wasn't my partner. He was their agent, sent to manage me, to smooth out my rough, working-class edges until I was palatable enough to carry the Whitmore name. He had already chosen his side. He just hadn't had the guts to tell me. The final, unforgivable insult arrived a week before the wedding via courier. It was a wedding invitation, thick and embossed with gold lettering. My own invitation. Chloe had sent it. My hands trembled as I opened it. There, under the announcement of the union of Evan Thomas Whitmore and Anna Marie Hudson, were the names of the hosts, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Whitmore. And beneath that, in smaller type, and Mr. and Mrs. Hudson. No first names. John and Mary Hudson of Akron, Ohio, had been reduced to an anonymous, generic title. They were a footnote, an afterthought. It was a deliberate, calculated act of disrespect, a way to tell my parents and me that they were insignificant. But that wasn't all. Tucked inside was a smaller card, an invitation to the rehearsal dinner at the yacht club. My parents' names were not on it. My name was not on it. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Sorry, it read, accompanied by a winking emoji. Rehearsal dinner is just for the groom's side. You know, family only. I'm sure you understand. I stared at the invitation, at the misspelled names of my parents, at the casual cruelty of Chloe's message. My blood, which had been simmering for weeks, began to boil. They hadn't just insulted me, they had insulted my family, my father, the plumber they looked down on, my mother, the waitress who worked double shifts. They had disrespected the people who, for all their faults, were still my blood. This wasn't a wedding. It was an annexation. And the quiet, obedient girl from Ohio was done being colonized. This was the last straw, the very last one. I stared at the wedding invitation, at the anonymous insult where my parents' names should have been. Something inside me, something that had been bending and cracking for months, finally snapped. The shaking in my hands stopped. The hot tears of anger and humiliation dried up. A profound, chilling calm settled over me, It was the clarity of the battlefield, the moment when all the noise fades away and there is only the mission. My hands were steady as I picked up my phone. I didn't text, I called. Evan answered on the second ring, his voice breezy and distracted. "Hey, what's up?" "I need you to meet me," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. Can it wait? I'm with my parents, we're tasting cakes." "No," I cut him off. "It cannot wait. There is a Waffle House on the corner of Bragg Boulevard and I-295. You have 30 minutes to get here. If you are not here in 30 minutes, we are done. Everything is over." I hung up before he could respond. There would be no more negotiating, no more pleading. This was an order. 28 minutes later, his silver Porsche 911 pulled into the parking lot, looking as out of place as a spaceship. He slid into the sticky vinyl booth opposite me, his face a mixture of annoyance and confusion. He wrinkled his nose. "God, it smells like grease in here." "What is so important, Anna? My mother is having a meltdown about buttercream." I didn't say a word. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 documents. I slid them across the table, onto the spot of spilled coffee a waitress had missed. First, the 50-page prenuptial agreement. Then, on top of it, the gold-embossed wedding invitation. I tapped the paper with my finger. "What is this, Evan?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You told me you loved me. You told me we were a team. So, tell me what this is. Is this love? Or is this a corporate merger where my family and I are the assets being liquidated?" His eyes darted from the papers to my face and back again. The color drained from his cheeks. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes and knew the game was up. He slumped in his seat, the fight going out of him completely. He stammered. I didn't know what to do. "You could have told them no," I said, my voice like ice. "You could have defended my family's honor. You could have acted like a man." He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice muffled. "They're my parents. They control my trust fund. The VP position, the apartment in the city, this car, all of it. If I don't do what they say, I lose everything." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading and pathetic. "I'll have nothing, Anna. Nothing." I stared at him, at this weak, broken man who was terrified of having nothing, and I felt nothing. The love, the hurt, the anger. It was all gone. All that was left was a profound, weary pity. He already had nothing. He just didn't know it yet. Slowly, I stood up. I looked down at him, not as his fiancé, but as his commanding officer delivering a final, damning verdict. "When I enlisted," I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of an oath, "I took a vow to support and defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought the enemy would be the family I was supposed to be joining." I leaned in closer. "You are a coward, Evan, and I am done with cowards." His eyes widened in panic. "Anna, please." "You're right," I said, cutting him off. "You will have nothing." Then I did the one thing they would never expect. I reached for my left hand and slowly, deliberately, twisted the 5-carat diamond engagement ring off my finger. The diamond, which had once seemed so bright and full of promise, now looked like a cold, meaningless piece of glass. Evan stared at the ring in my hand, his mouth hanging open. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I reached for his left hand, which was resting limply on the table. I turned it over, palm up. I placed the heavy, expensive ring right in the center of his soft, uncalloused hand. Then, I picked up the sticky bottle of maple syrup from the table dispenser. I unscrewed the cap, and, as he watched in horrified disbelief, I turned it upside down. A thick, amber river of syrup poured out, covering the brilliant diamond and his trembling hand in a slow, sticky, suffocating flood. He gasped, trying to pull his hand back, but he was too slow. The syrup pooled in his palm, drowning the symbol of their wealth and my supposed bondage. I looked him dead in the eye. "Give this back to your mother," I said, my voice cold and final. "Tell her I don't need her money. I have something she can never buy." I let the bottle clatter onto the table. "I have my honor." and with that, I turned my back on him. I walked out of that Waffle House, leaving him sitting there in a sticky pool of his own making, a prince drowning in syrup on a vinyl throne. I didn't look back, not once. Have you ever had that one moment, that one final straw where you knew you had to choose yourself? If you have, I want you to go to the comments and just type the word honor. That's our word. It's what they can never take from us. And if my story is speaking to you, please hit that like button to show your support. Let's show them what we're made of. Walking away from that Waffle House felt like stepping out of a burning building into the clean night air. The immense pressure that had been building inside me for months was finally released. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even sad. I was free. But as the adrenaline faded, a question began to form in the quiet of my mind. A question planted there by Father Michael. After I had left Evan, I'd called the chaplain to tell him what happened. He listened patiently and then said something that stuck with me. Anna, hatred that strong, that visceral, is almost never about the person it's aimed at. People who hate like that are usually hiding their own shame. Shame. The word echoed in my memory, and it triggered another memory, a loose thread from that first disastrous dinner. I remembered Tom Whitmore, his face tight with anger as he looked at me saying, "My mother had foolish ideas like yours once. She almost destroyed this family." At the time, I had dismissed it as just another insult, but now, filtered through the lens of Father Michael's wisdom, it felt different. It felt like a clue. Why would my desire to serve in the military remind him of his own mother? What foolish ideas could a grande dame of a Connecticut old money family possibly have in common with a plumber's daughter from Ohio? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my laptop, the screen casting a pale blue light in my dark apartment. I opened a search engine and typed in 3 words. Eleanor Whitmore, Greenwich. The initial results were what you'd expect. Society pages from the 1950s and 60s, mentions in charity event programs, a photo of her at a yacht club christening. She was beautiful, elegant, the perfect picture of a blue-blooded matriarch. But as I dug deeper, past the curated public image, anomalies began to appear. An engagement to a prominent banker was quietly broken. Her name vanished from the social registers for a period of several years during the early 1940s. Then, a small brief obituary from 1985 mentioned she was survived by her son, Thomas, and that a private service would be held. There was no mention of a husband, no mention of her life's work. It was sterile, impersonal. It was an erasure. My mission had begun. For the next week, I used every bit of my military intelligence training. I cross-referenced records, searched digitized newspaper archives, and went down rabbit holes of genealogical websites. I was looking for a ghost. The breakthrough came from a place I never expected. I received an email from an encrypted address with the subject line, Eleanor Whitmore. My heart hammered. The message was brief. It was from a man named Arthur Vance, a retired lawyer living in Florida. He wrote that he had been the Whitmore family's junior legal counsel in the early 80s, and that he had been unceremoniously fired by a young Tom Whitmore for what Tom called a lack of loyalty. "I never spoke up then," he wrote, "but I always felt that Mrs. Eleanor was treated unjustly. The official story is not the true story. If you are seeking the truth about her, I may be able to help." A week later, I was sitting in a quiet coffee shop in Sarasota, Florida, across from a man in his late 70s with sharp, intelligent eyes. Arthur Vance had a file with him, a thin, worn-out manila folder. Tom's father, Evan's grandfather, was a tyrant, Arthur explained, his voice low. He believed the Whitmore name was paramount. Eleanor was brilliant and strong-willed, and she felt suffocated. When World War II broke out, she did something unforgivable in her family's eyes. She renounced her inheritance, went against her father's wishes, and enlisted in the Army Nurse Corps. My breath caught in my throat. An Army nurse. She served with distinction in a field hospital in France, he continued. It was the only time in her life she was truly happy. When she came back, her family treated her like a pariah. They had told everyone she was unwell and living abroad. They forced her back into a gilded cage. He slid the folder across the table. This is a copy of a letter she wrote to me shortly before she died. She made me promise to keep it. Her official will, the one Tom executed, was a sham. This was her true last testament. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of a handwritten letter, the script elegant but firm. It was Eleanor's story, in her own words. She wrote of her love for the army, for the camaraderie and the sense of purpose she found there. She wrote of her heartbreak at being shunned by the family she had defied in order to serve her country. But it was the last page that changed everything. It was a formal addendum, a codicil to her will that she had signed and had notarized by Arthur. She had secretly preserved a portion of her original inheritance, investing it wisely over the decades. It had grown into a multi-million-dollar fortune. She had placed it all into a single, separate account. She called it the Honor Trust. The terms were crystal clear, written with the precision of a legal document, but the heart of a soldier. The trust and all of its assets was to be bequeathed to the first of my direct descendants or their chosen spouse, who embodies the spirit of military service, honor, and selfless duty to this nation. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The puzzle pieces slammed together with the force of a thunderclap. Tom and Linda's hatred wasn't about my social class. It wasn't about my working-class roots or my lack of a fancy pedigree. They didn't despise me because I was a soldier. They were terrified of me because I was a soldier. They knew about the Honor Trust. They had buried it, hiding the will and pretending it never existed so that Tom could keep control of the money. My arrival, my engagement to their son, the first direct descendant, wasn't a social inconvenience. It was a direct legal threat to millions of dollars. As the spouse of an heir who perfectly met the trust's conditions, I had a legitimate claim to that fortune. Their entire campaign against me, the insults, the manipulation, the prenup, the attempt to buy me off, it was never about classism. It was about greed. They weren't trying to protect their son's future. They were trying to protect their stolen inheritance. I looked up from the letter, my mind racing. The shame Father Michael had spoken of, it wasn't mine, it was theirs. They had dishonored the memory of their own mother, a war hero, for money. I finally had the truth. And the truth, I realized, was the most powerful weapon of all. I learned through the grapevine, a sympathetic caterer who knew one of the cooks at Father Michael's Thanksgiving dinner, that the Whitmore wedding was still on. They hadn't even bothered to change the date. They simply slotted in a new bride. The blonde from the yacht, a daughter of a banking dynasty just as powerful as their own. It was a seamless transition, a corporate merger disguised as a marriage. I had been a temporary disruption, easily removed and replaced. They thought I would just disappear. They thought I would crawl back to my working-class hole in Ohio and lick my wounds in silence. They underestimated me. They underestimated a United States Army sergeant. And so I decided I needed to attend the rehearsal dinner, uninvited. The Greenwich Yacht Club was a fortress of privilege, perched on the edge of the Long Island Sound. The air smelled of salt and money. Inside, the main ballroom was a glittering sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and designer gowns. The most powerful people in finance and East Coast society were all there, champagne flutes in hand, laughing their brittle laughs. At the head table, Evan sat next to his new fiancé, looking like a handsome hostage. I had timed my entrance perfectly. I waited until Tom Whitmore stood up, tapping a glass with a spoon to begin his welcome toast. As he opened his mouth to speak, the grand ballroom doors swung open, and I walked in. I was not wearing a cocktail dress. I was in my full Army service uniform, the dark blue jacket perfectly pressed, the gold stripes on my trousers gleaming. The medals on my chest, for service, for conduct, for valor, clinked softly with each step. I walked with the steady, measured cadence of a soldier on parade. My back was straight, my chin was up, my gaze was fixed. A wave of silence rolled through the room. The laughter died. The chatter stopped. Every single head turned towards me. It was the sound of 100 champagne glasses freezing in mid-air. I could feel their collective shock, a palpable force in the room. Tom Whitmore stared, his face turning the color of ash. Linda's hand flew to her pearls, her mouth a perfect O of horror. Evan looked like he'd seen a ghost. Tom and Linda recovered first. They practically sprinted across the room to intercept me, their faces contorted with fury. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Tom hissed, his voice a low, vicious snarl. "This is a private event. Get out before I have security throw you out." I stopped just before them and gave them a smile. A cold, calm, predatory smile. "Don't worry, Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the dead silence. "I'm not here to crash the party. I'm here as a guest of honor." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore." The name hit them like a physical blow. Linda flinched, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in Tom's eyes. Before they could respond, I walked around them. I moved with purpose, heading directly for the small stage where the band had been setting up. I bypassed the steps and hoisted myself up in one fluid motion. I took the microphone from its stand. The feedback squealed for a second before I adjusted it. Now, I had everyone's undivided attention. I looked out at the sea of confused, wealthy faces. Then, my eyes found Tom, Linda, and Evan, who were frozen in the middle of the room. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady and amplified, filling every corner of the ballroom. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sergeant Anna Hudson. Though I'm sure most of you have heard of me by a different title, Evan's Unfortunate Choice from Ohio." A ripple of nervous murmuring went through the crowd. I looked directly at Tom. "I'm not here tonight to talk about my broken engagement. I'm here to honor another soldier, a soldier this family tried to bury and forget." I raised my voice. "I'm here to honor Army Nurse Corps veteran Eleanor Whitmore." Another wave of shock rippled through the room. I saw people whispering, looking at Tom for an explanation. He looked like he was about to have a stroke. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket pocket, a copy of Eleanor's final letter. "Eleanor Whitmore was more than Tom's mother," I announced. "She was a hero who served in France during World War II, but when she came home, her service was seen as a disgrace to the family name. They hid her away. They silenced her. They stole her story, and they stole her legacy." I unfolded the letter. "I have here her true last will and testament. In it, she created a multi-million-dollar trust fund. She called it the Honor Trust." The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the glasses. This trust was to be given to the first descendant, or their spouse, who embodied the spirit of military service and honor. I let my eyes sweep over the crowd before landing back on Tom and Linda. Now, my voice dropped, becoming hard as steel. "You don't hate me because I'm a soldier. You hate me because she was a soldier. You hate me because I am a living, breathing reminder of the mother you were ashamed of." I took a step forward, my voice rising with every word, a crescendo of righteous fury. "You were afraid of me. You were afraid I would find out about this trust. You were afraid I would expose you for what you are. Thieves. Thieves who desecrated the memory of your own mother, a war hero, to bankroll this pathetic, gilded life." I pointed a finger directly at them. "You talk about class? You judged my father, the plumber. You judged my mother, the waitress. You stand here in your designer clothes in your exclusive club, and you dare to talk about who has class?" I let the question hang in the air, a final damning indictment. "You don't have class," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "You don't even have honor." I placed the microphone back in its stand with a decisive click. And in the ringing, absolute silence of that grand ballroom, I turned around and walked off the stage. The war was over. And I had won. I walked out of the Greenwich Yacht Club and didn't stop until I reached the seawall. I stepped out into the cold, damp air, inhaling the salty tang of the Long Island Sound. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. Behind me was a life that was never mine, a future built on lies. Ahead of me was nothing. A blank slate, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a victory. The next morning, my phone exploded. It was a relentless barrage of calls and texts from numbers I didn't recognize. News travels fast in those circles, propelled by gossip and scandal. The Will Gates scandal, as one society blogger breathlessly called it, had ripped through their polished world like a hurricane. I ignored all of it. I put my phone on silent and let the storm rage without me. It was Arthur Vance, Eleanor's old lawyer, who gave me the full report a few days later. The fallout was catastrophic. The Whitmores had become social pariahs overnight. In a world where reputation and public honor are the ultimate currency, Tom Whitmore was suddenly bankrupt. Business partners, who preached loyalty and integrity in their annual reports, began to distance themselves, canceling deals and pulling investments. They didn't want to be associated with a man who had dishonored his own war hero mother for money. Tom's carefully constructed empire, built on a foundation of stolen honor, was beginning to crumble. The wedding, of course, was called off. The other banking family wanted nothing to do with their tainted name. I felt a quiet, grim satisfaction, but it wasn't joy. It was the exhausted relief of a soldier after a long, brutal battle. I had won, but I was tired. I had survived, but I was scarred. Victory, I was learning, often feels a lot like emptiness. About a week later, the past came looking for me. It was late, and a fierce autumn rain was lashing against the windows of my apartment at Fort Bragg. There was a frantic pounding on my door. I looked through the peephole, and my heart stopped. It was Evan. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive cashmere coat dripping water onto the concrete walkway. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes wild with desperation. He looked like a shipwreck survivor who had finally washed ashore. I opened the door. "Anna," he choked out, his voice raw. "Thank God." He tried to step inside, but I didn't move. "What do you want, Evan?" I asked, my voice flat. "I'm sorry," he pleaded, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "God, Anna, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was a coward. I was a fool." He reached for my hands. "I'll give it all up. All of it. I told them I don't want the trust fund. I don't want the VP job. I don't want any of it. I just want you." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate hope, waiting for me to say the words that would fix everything, to welcome him back into the warmth. A year ago, I would have. 6 months ago, I would have. But the woman he was talking to now was not the same woman he had left on that yacht. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt no anger. I felt no gut-wrenching pain. All I felt was a deep, profound pity. Pity for this man-child who had never been forced to stand on his own 2 feet, who had been so terrified of losing his gilded cage that he had willingly thrown away the only real thing he had. "It's too late, Evan," I said, my voice gentle but firm. There was no malice in it, only a sad finality. "No, it's not," he insisted, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I love you." "You had a choice," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You had a choice when your mother insulted me, when your father tried to buy me, when your sister mocked my family. You had a choice every single day, and you never chose me. You didn't choose me when it mattered." I took a deep breath. "Now, you're choosing me because you have nothing left to lose, and I deserve someone who chooses me first, not as a last resort." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by the devastating understanding that some things, once broken, can never be repaired. I didn't slam the door. I just quietly closed it, shutting him out in the rain, shutting out the past for good. Forgiving someone, I realized, doesn't mean you have to give them a key to get back into your life. Drawing a boundary is the ultimate act of self-love. The next day, I met with Arthur Vance one last time. We had a strong legal claim to the honor trust. We could have fought, and we probably would have won. "I don't want their money," I told him, pushing the case file back across his desk. "I never did. That was never the point." "So, what do you want to do, Sergeant?" he asked. "I just want the truth to be known," I said. "And I want Eleanor's legacy to be honored in the way she intended." A new idea, clean and powerful, began to form in my mind. Let's use the entire trust to establish a new scholarship foundation. We'll call it the Eleanor Whitmore Honor Scholarship. and we'll give it to female soldiers and veterans across the country who are pursuing a higher education." Arthur looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. He understood. This was the best kind of victory. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. It was about taking something that had been corrupted by greed and shame and turning it into a force for good. Taking a legacy of stolen honor and transforming it into a future of earned opportunities for women just like me. And just like her. 2 years have passed since that night at the yacht club. 2 years of quiet rebuilding, of focusing on the small disciplines that piece a life back together. I learned, much like Admiral McRaven once said, that if you want to change the world, you start by making your bed. So, I made my bed every morning. I focused on my duties, on my soldiers, on my own education. I went through officer candidate school. And piece by piece, I built a new dawn for myself. Today, I'm standing at a podium, not as Sergeant Hudson, but as Lieutenant Hudson. I'm not in a cold, hostile dining room. I'm in a university auditorium filled with bright, hopeful faces. It's the inaugural award ceremony for the Eleanor Whitmore Honor Scholarship. In front of me are 10 incredible young women, all cadets in the ROTC program, all brimming with the same fire and determination I once had. I look out at them, and I see the future. Honor, I say, my voice clear and steady, is not something you inherit. It's not a name or a bank account. It's a choice you make every single day. It's the choice to be honest when it's easier to lie. It's the choice to stand up for what's right when it's easier to stay silent. Eleanor Whitmore made that choice. And today, we honor her and we honor each of you as you prepare to make those same choices in service to this country. As I finish my speech and the applause fills the room, my eyes find him in the audience, Dr. Mark Casey. He's a captain in the Army Medical Corps, a trauma surgeon I met during a joint training exercise a year ago. He's not sitting with the other dignitaries. He's in the back, leaning against a wall, just watching me. He's not flashy like Evan. He's quiet, steady, and strong, with kind eyes that have seen too much but have never lost their warmth. He gives me a small, proud smile, a silent communication that speaks volumes more than any grand declaration ever could. When I step down from the stage, he's there waiting for me. He doesn't say, "You were great." He just quietly takes my hand, his grip warm and firm. His presence is a silent promise. I am here, I see you, I've got your back. Learning to trust again after Evan was the hardest battle I've ever fought. My own personal war against the ghosts of betrayal. With Mark, it's different. He doesn't try to fill the broken pieces in me. He just respects the scars and loves the woman they belong to. He never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am. The most unexpected healing, however, came not from the future, but from the distant past. A few months ago, a letter arrived at my office. The envelope was cheap, the address written in a barely legible, shaky scrawl. It was from Akron, Ohio. It was from my father. A local news station in Ohio had picked up the story about the Scholarship Foundation. They had run a small human interest piece featuring my picture and a quote about honoring veterans. My father had seen it. I opened the letter, my hands trembling for the first time in years. It wasn't long. The words were clumsy, misspelled, written on a piece of lined paper torn from a notepad. "Anna," it read. "I saw you on the news. Your mother showed me. I don't say this stuff ever. You know that. But I was at the bar with the guys and I told them. I told all of them about you, what you did. The guys all raised a glass. I am proud of you. You are stronger than both your brothers put together. Dad." I read it once, then twice. I sat there in my office holding that crumpled piece of paper, and I cried. But these weren't the tears of a hurt little girl. They were the tears of a grown woman finally letting go of a pain she had carried for a lifetime. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. But it was something far more real. It was a crack in the wall he had built his entire life. It was, in its own broken way, a declaration of love. The validation I had chased my whole life had finally arrived, long after I had stopped needing it, and that made it all the more precious. The Whitmores tried to steal my future by weaponizing my past. They tried to tell me that my story was one of shame, of being a burden, of not being good enough. They wanted to write my legacy for me, casting me as a footnote in their grand, empty narrative. But they forgot one fundamental truth about a soldier. We don't retreat. We don't break. And we write our own damn story. My legacy isn't written in someone else's will. It's not defined by the name of a man or the size of a diamond ring. It's forged in the oath I took, in the uniform I proudly wear, and in the life I built for myself, brick by brick, out of the rubble of what they tried to destroy. My honor is my own. My dawn is of my own making, and so is yours. Before I go, I want to speak directly to you. Thank you for walking this path with me. My story is just one of many, and I know that from the thousands of you who have typed honor and I see you. If you have ever been made to feel small or unworthy by the very people who should have lifted you up, please hear me now. Your worth is not determined by their judgment. It is forged in your own resilience. Your honor is your own, and your dawn is waiting. This channel is a home for these stories of strength. If you want to hear more and to be a part of our community, please subscribe. And if you know someone who feels lost in the dark right now, share this story with them. You never know when you might be the light they need.